But the first thing you got to do is you got to go to Turtle's YouTube. You don't have to, but I would suggest so you can hear what all the buzz is about. You know, if you like listening to us, you can also see what we look like. We're not that fantastic to look at, but we are on here, and you can see what it's like in the studio to move yourself out of the audio version. But yeah, we'd love your support on YouTube, and that's a big sharing platform. A lot of people use it all over the globe. And we put a lot of work into getting this stuff produced. We're not asking for any sort of payback on it, but we'd love for you guys to share and comment and interact, because interaction brings us all to life here.
Yes, and we can. We have 135 subscribers right now.
Woohoo, 135!
And so we need to get that to at least 1 million.
How are we in 80 plus countries? We have 100 something people subscribing.
It's because we're producing shit content, Alex. No one likes us.
No, it's funny. We found that a lot more people are just listening in an audio format.
Yes,
substantially more.
Oh yeah, substantially more. Yeah.
So that's been kind of nice, but like all things in life, good things take time. It'll steamroll, and when someone finds it, they're like, "Oh, this is a lot of content."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah, we're here to educate.
Yeah, and Google's #1 search engine, YouTube's #2 for search engines.
Yeah, so that's why you got to be on both.
Most people, when they watch our stuff, they've looked something up on YouTube, and then we popped up.
Yeah.
Let's talk about climate change. #1 in our best 7 is climate stability.
Mm-hmm.
And let's talk about wild bees.
Oh, bees are fun. Are not all bees wild? How do you domesticate a bee? You put a leash on it?
You put it in a, I guess if you have your own hives, then they're domesticated.
Do I have to, feed it a bowl of food when it's whining at me?
Have you seen those hives that collect the honey automatically in a jar?
I love that. And you twist the thing and it doesn't upset the hive.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah. So I love stuff like that.
That way you don't have to pull them out and disturb them. It literally just shifts the hexagonal structure slightly so that the honey can move through.
We need to buy one of those and stick it somewhere.
Right in here.
Yeah. Stick it through our window.
Well,
have you seen those? They have
listen,
the clear...
if the bee's undisturbed, I'll keep them in the house.
Yeah. Yeah. They're not, it's not that big of a
studio bees.
Studio bees, yeah. Those
bee
are
gate.
Pets. Yeah.
Bee gate. Where did our bees go?
We're watching them.
This is the climate bee gate. Where are the bees going?
Wild bees are more affected by climate change than by disturbances to their habitats, according to a team of researchers led by Penn State.
Yeah. So what does that mean? So if I'm gonna, in the middle of a nicely forested area with a bunch of flowers, if I'm gonna slam down like a 55 plus, aging community, retirement community, it's not really going to upset the bees.
No.
What's going to upset the bees is precipitation. What's going to upset the bees is too much sunlight, too much heat. Trapping all that in there, because that's going to affect actually the flora and fauna that allowed them to thrive. Putting a house in the way, the bee flies around it. But physically crippling the system itself, not displacing flowers, but, you can change their concentration, whatever it might be. What you're looking at is really the rain and the sun. So let's talk about how our climate, I guess in all senses, us affecting these things, regardless how you say. If you put a house there, you're still affecting it, right? And if the Earth's getting too hot, it's still affecting the bees. So either way you rub, this change in climate is not positive for the outcome of the bee ecosystem.
Yeah, and I want people to understand the way that researchers work with data. Because this is interesting. Every problem that's in the world will be solved by data.
All of it.
And go ahead and speak to that, because I want people to understand this is why your data is so important.
Yeah, so what's a really good old school example for data?
I saw a biography from Hershey. The guy that invented Mr. Hershey.
I was going very scientific, but yeah, tell me about the Hershey one. Yeah.
So you have a lot of variables to make a Hershey's milk chocolate bar. There's a lot of different ingredients in there. There's cocoa, and so now you have a supply system chain
and all this other stuff. Yeah,
you have supply. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
milk fats.
You have and everybody loves chocolate, but you have it's a complex system to get that bar to the grocery store or convenience store.
Yeah, without it melting and losing form.
And the more data that they have, in these processes, the more efficient that they can be, because like Kroger and all these other Walmart, they're running on razor thin margins.
Yeah.
So it's the same way with candy.
So you don't have any loss in the things that you're purchasing and having to store on a shelf. Where it's stored, temperature in the store, all this other stuff, how it affects your product, what that shelf life looks like. And then so that's one thing you can solve with data, right? Is from, that economic sense. Another one, just as a local example, is when they were doing the first nuclear testing here at the Trinity Test site, which is further west of Socorro, here in New Mexico, near Pie Town.
I love that.
Yeah. So they really didn't have any data when they were going to drop this thing. They said, listen, when this blows up, it could either be essentially a concentrated chain reaction where it stops at a specific point when we split these atoms, or this thing just keeps going and we literally rip a hole in the universe. Because you start splitting atoms and then just like everything just turns into one super nuke, right? Earth is a super nuke. Solar system turns into a super nuke. You know what I mean? If you can picture that.
This is a risk.
It was a risk, and there was an unknown that needed to be solved. And the only way they could solve it was with data. And so they have all these different recording instruments that are sitting around here. So most of us operate on a hunch. And these guys were operating on a hunch during the Manhattan Project with a nuclear bomb. They were totally unsure about the science. So when they were moving into a new future, a new way of science, of nuclear technology, it's like, okay, well, the only way to solve for that unknown is to test, to acquire as much data as possible so that when we come back, we can refine our processes and we don't have to be insane about this super nuke idea that we're ripping a hole in the universe. So the bomb goes off and they're like, well, that was a plus. It was way bigger than we expected, but it was a sustained chain reaction. It stopped at a specific point. It didn't just become critical and stay critical forever. And so through that, they acquired, telemetry data, ground readings, air quality, light, heat, everything that was going on in the environment and things that were disturbed within that environment. And then they went back through their scientific process and solved how they were going to expand upon that technology. And it's really interesting that, they did make something, albeit negative, a bomb. But from that, a lot of great things were learned.
Mm-hmm. It's always that way.
There's been huge developments in technology. It'd be nice if we had the inverse, where we were just making good things with it.
Hey, let's make some clean energy.
Yeah, rather than a weapon first.
Right.
But it's really interesting. And climate models. There are some incredible climate models that have been developed because of nuclear testing for above ground explosions. I had a professor that specialized that back in the day, and it was quite interesting to learn about how they actually do those readings when you don't have, you have the surface of the Earth. So there's a couple ways you can blow a nuke up. Okay, you can blow it up in the air, you can blow it up when it hits the surface, or you can blow it up underground. And all those are going to have different sort of reactions and, what have you. I'm not a nuclear physicist here. But the general idea is that there's different data inputs and outputs that are happening. Okay, here's our bomb. This is how much stuff we put into it with our data. What's our proposed outcome going to be? And through the analysis of a greater amount of data, they created efficiencies in their processes, and they could solve for what was going on to make sure that, okay, now we know what our safety measure is. So whether or not you're building a Hershey's bar or building a nuke, the data is going to help you understand what those margins of safety might be, margins of economics, margins of effect, especially systemic effects when you're talking about something like a nuclear chain reaction. So if you're saying, why is data so important for solving these problems? Well, data is absolutely fundamental to solving everything. And they were doing this before anything was really digital. It's that quite analog readings that they have, the clicking Geiger counter and stuff like that. That stuff's not digital. It's just a little bar that's moving back and forth. And, it's telling you the reading as like these radioactive particles are moving through this metal rod, because that's what they do. But that stuff was all analog. Nothing's really changed. Go back to early wartime commanders, right? During the Greco-Roman period. They had a board on a table and they're like moving huge chess pieces, but that's their data. They send a scout out. But today we have GPS stuff, or we can go ask someone through our decentralized systems or send them a message on WhatsApp to get an idea of what's happening somewhere else. Nothing has really changed. It's just the medium change. And now we have the ability to exchange that data quicker, assimilate it in a better format, and then analyze it more efficiently, more so than we could have ever done in some sort of analog format. So when we fundamentally look at this, whether it's bees, Hershey's Kisses, nuclear bombs, or you're a Greco-Roman soldier, data is fundamental to the success of just about everything.
Yeah, and these researchers, they analyzed 14 years of United States Geological Survey data to find the set of wild bees concurrences. And they did it in more than 1,000 locations in Maryland, Delaware, and Washington, D.C.
And thank you for letting me rant.
Oh, yeah.
And so for these...
I always enjoy those.
For these models here specifically, what they're trying to do is they're trying to get the most amount of data. So it's like, what is the historical track record? So we need a huge time value, and then we need the highest volume possible within that time.
Right.
Because then you start to get frequency. And through that frequency, you can be like, okay, now I have indicators across time and volume. And so it's like analyzing the stock market at that point, because that's how linear time is. So they're trying to take these linear things, put them together, and put it into our three-dimensional world, which doesn't really make much sense. But anyway, that is the focus here. And for a great period of time, because our big data models have lacked, and the fundamental idea of how we do research has lacked kind of that primary source value and the ability to take data right now, very up-to-date data, we rely on historical things to kind of say, well, how do we extrapolate that to say what our future looks like? But so many things are different every day. You know, if someone was watching our podcast, right, we used to sit at a little tiny table. No TV, no bookshelves, no nothing, no cameras. And then all of a sudden, you would have had no historical data from all the episodes we had. And then all of a sudden, a table shows up, beautiful mic arms, new microphones, TV, all this other stuff. Like, what's going on? It's a complete outlier. So it's, you know, the ability for us to tell with our big data, there's so many errors because you don't really know at the fundamental level, especially whether the bee has consciousness, right? You're strictly observing. So when it comes to data research and you're doing it from only an observational format as like a third party and not getting primary data, you're just going to do whatever you can to get the most amount of information possible because they think that's what's going to normalize that curve.
Yeah, and one of the things that they found, and you brought this up, was more, and this is why it's so important to have the right data and not be dogma about the data. Dogmatic, because we could push it and say, you just got to stop building houses. But like you had said, the houses are no concern.
Yeah.
The spring bees, the issue is too much rain.
Yeah.
So we don't create enough spring bees. And then you raise the temperature, of course, you're going to have less flowers.
Well, so consider, in the cities how they do those green roofs?
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, now I've, replaced somewhat of that greenscape that hadn't been there or was totally non-existent with something. But that doesn't help the bees because it's still too damn hot for them to be up there.
Yeah.
The flowers are crippled by the albedo and the heat coming off the ground, and it causes their flowers to wilt. There's nothing of value. Or maybe it's in an area like Seattle where it's just too much perpetual rain.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing can grow. It's dampening everything down. It's like a farm field that gets flooded in India. Like, what are you going to do? I had a great crop season, but people are like, oh, you got to water your crops. Well, too much water inhibits growth. When you step out of that world of balance, Jason, which is what we talk about, that climate stability, not so much climate change, but when you move out of that state of stability, that's when things get out of whack. And what may seem positive is really, it needs a little bit more than negative, right? So if it's too hot, you actually need more cold because you got to level it out because that's better in the equilibrium of the flora and fauna within that local ecosystem from Washington, D.C., the rest of Maryland, and I don't know where else they did that study.
Yeah. Whenever you look at climate stability, and so we're looking at here, we see, warmer winters, hotter summers.
Yeah.
And now we're, as we see global warming continue to wreak havoc on the world, and it's kind of like, you can boil a frog, and you just slowly start turning up the heat, and then next thing you know, he's boiled.
I've never boiled a frog.
I never have either, but
the
analogy is that way. Yeah.
I boiled a lobster.
And you just go slow. And then next thing you know, boom, they're cooked. And I think because in this world of fast food and quick, we don't see dramatic changes, but 40 years from now, 50 years from now, 70 years from now we have a world that is beyond repair.
Yeah. And you don't want to get to that point because then you're screwed.
Yeah. I don't want to leave my grandkids with a world that is apocalyptic.
What is the word I came up with that I'm going to submit to Merriam-Webster? Chirrosis?
Yes.
So I just want to explain, I'm going to bring this up because I thought this was pretty good. So chirrosis is an adjective. Mind you, you're not going to find this online. I created this word. Hopefully it comes online sometime. And I said it's a state of dis-ease when an individual or collective of individuals are faced with a moment of difficult decision, and look back in wanting of choosing an earlier moment in time to solve their imminent problem after a realization that it is too late. We don't want that.
No.
We don't want to look at the oblivion when the earth is like so hot, so dry, lacking its moisture, lacking the ability to support us. And that's when we wake up, because we're only at that short-sighted chance of moment when you're only 15 feet from oblivion. I'd rather be 70 years away from it, 1,000 years away from oblivion, and pay attention then, rather than stand here 15 feet away and look back and like, oh, you guys remember that moment that passed when we should have done this? Crap. And that's what that state, and then you become in a state of dis-ease.
Right.
Because you're only focusing on the anxiety and the fear of what's very imminent and absolutely going to happen. We don't want to get there.
No.
Okay. And that's why it's so important for us to focus on these things and talk about them. To remove the bullshit, remove the bias, remove the dogmas, remove the untruths, and just look at the data for what it is and accept that truthful data. Because that's the thing that's going to solve that problem. I don't want us to be a Chirrosis of human society. All right. This is very important. So talking about a bumblebee or figuring out whether or not someone's going to have fast food tomorrow and understanding what that effect is systemically, that's going to be solved with data. And it's important that we come together and solve that by sharing that information.
And it's important to share that information. How would an individual, whether they're in India, whether they're in Russia, Australia, how can they help with using their data to help solve these issues?
Yeah, so if you're on TARTLE and you're populating this data towards your preferences and habits and identifiable information and other systems you use online and talking about what you purchase, all of these things can be collectively analyzed by these people that have these huge resources to analyze these large data sets, these big decision makers, so that you with your data are essentially telling them, this is where the issues sit and this is where the solve is. This is how we focus on it. And it's not for you to, directly tell them that, oh, hey, this is what you should be looking at. It's a function of now we're giving you the data so you know exactly what to look at.
Yes.
When before they didn't have any of it. So regardless of where you are across the globe, using the TARTLE marketplace, you can share your data towards these specific things, whatever they are, towards a specific business or a specific cause, you name it, or anonymously. You just want to share as much as possible. All of that is of great benefit because the more truthful information that is shared globally, the more truthful our society becomes and the more we move away from things that are untruthful, that hinder our evolution and drive us closer to that point of oblivion. Not to get dark on it, but yeah.
Let's get dark. Dark mode. YouTube. Go to TARTLE on YouTube and subscribe.